The fields around Borodino filled with earthworks and cannon, men digging through the night under the watch of Orthodox priests who carried sacred icons along the lines. Kutuzov positioned Barclay's First Army on the right, with the Kalachia River guarding its front. Bagration's Second Army held the left, reinforced with massive earthworks. The French would soon call the Great Redoubt and the Flatches arrow-shaped fortifications that bristled with guns. On September 5th, Napoleon's men arrived. He could see immediately that the fort Borodino redoubt had to be taken. French infantry and Polish troops stormed a position in brutal fighting that cost thousands of lives. The Russians withdrew, leaving Napoleon uneasy at how fiercely they resisted. The next day passed in tense preparation. Marshal Davout urged Napoleon to attempt a wide southern flank attack to envelop the Russians, but Napoleon refused. He believed a frontal hammer blow would break them. At dawn on September 7th, the battle began. French guns opened a thunderous bombardment that shook the fields and villages. Eugene's Fourth Corps surged toward Borodino village, forcing Russian guardsmen back across the river. Davout's First Corps advanced toward the Flatches under a storm of artillery fire. To the south, the Poles of the Fifth Corps struggled through thick woods and ravines. The fighting quickly turned into chaos. Russian infantry counterattacked with brutal determination. Cannon fire tore holes through the French ranks. Men fought hand-to-hand inside the earthworks. The Flatches changed hands repeatedly as bayonets flashed and muskets cracked at point-blank range. Ney, Murat, Devout Napoleon's most aggressive commanders, threw their men forward again and again. Murat, dressed in flamboyant plumes and gold braid, led cavalry charges so reckless that even the Cossacks admired him and sought to capture him alive. Around 10 in the morning, Bagration, the very spirit of Russia's left wing, was struck by shell fragments. Mortally wounded, he was carried from the field. His infantry trembled, shaken by the loss of the commander they idolized. At last, the French took the Flatches, pushing toward the center. Friant's division surged forward. Heavy cavalry clashed in swirling melees, cuirassiers, smashing into Russian guardsmen who formed squares that bent but did not break. At the Great Redoubt, Eugene launched a massive assault. Russian gunners focused on the infantry in front, unaware that French and Saxon cavalry were sweeping around behind them. In a stunning maneuver, the cavalry charged straight into the rear of the redoubt, cutting down gunners and infantry in savage close-quarters fighting. The redoubt fell, yet even in retreat, the Russians fought like iron. As Eugene's men tried to expand their hold, Russian cavalry slammed into them, halting any chance of complete breakthrough. Officers begged Napoleon to commit the Imperial Guard for the final blow. They believed the war could be won in a single hour. But Napoleon refused. Ill, cautious, and conscious of the vast distance from France, he held back his last reserve. By late afternoon, both armies were exhausted. The battlefield was an ocean of bodies, smoke, and shattered guns. Infantry battalions were down to a fraction of their strength. Cavalry horses collapsed where they stood. Gunners slumped beside silent cannons. As dusk fell, the firing faded. Napoleon expected combat to resume at dawn, but it did not. Kutuzov, horrified by the casualties, 44,000 Russians in a single day, ordered withdrawal. Moscow could not be saved. A week later, Napoleon entered the city. He expected surrender. Instead, he found silence. 90% of the population had fled. At first, only one fire burned, blamed on drunken soldiers. Then another. And another. Soon, flames rose across the ancient city. Governor Rostopchin had ordered Moscow destroyed rather than let it feed the invader. Criminals released from jail carried torches through the streets, igniting warehouses and homes, while French soldiers tried desperately to stop the fire. Within 4 days, 2/3 of Moscow was ash and ruin. In the Kremlin, Napoleon waited for a message from Alexander. He sent letters. He offered peace. He expected surrender. No reply ever came. Cossacks struck his supply lines. Russian partisans slaughtered stragglers. Fresh Russian troops gathered on every flank. Rumors swirled that Prussia and Austria were preparing to abandon him. Napoleon still hoped for a last-minute diplomatic miracle. Fine October weather lulled him into waiting. Then on October 13th, the first snow fell. 5 days later, Kutuzov smashed Murat's advance guard at Vink. Napoleon finally ordered the retreat. 100,000 men, along with tens of thousands of civilians, wives, and camp followers, marched out of Moscow in a massive, burdened column. Soldiers loaded wagons with food, alcohol, silks, gold, icons, and anything they could carry. But the retreat was already doomed. To the north, Wittgenstein pushed back French forces. To the south, Chichagov advanced from Moldavia. The corridor for Napoleon's return was shrinking. Napoleon planned to march southwest through Kaluga to reach untouched countryside rich in supplies. But Kutuzov blocked the road in savage fighting. Eugene's Italians drove the Russians out of the town. Kutuzov, though beaten locally, refused to give ground. Napoleon recognized the danger. To force his way south meant another battle like Borodino, but now with half an army. So he turned back toward the road to Smolenska, the same scorched, ruined path that had already been stripped bare. Near Borodino, the corpses of thousands lay half-buried, picked at by ravens. The sight chilled even hardened veterans. Then came the cold. Snowstorms arrived. Temperatures plunged. Horses died by thousands. Without them, wagons, guns, and supplies were abandoned. Soldiers froze in their sleep. Discipline disintegrated. Men left the columns in desperate search of food, only to be slaughtered by Cossacks or killed by vengeful peasants. At Vyazma, the Russians struck Devout's rear guard in a fierce ambush. Ney and Eugene fought their way back to help him, but the French were driven into the burning town. The retreat became slower, more chaotic, more horrifying. When Napoleon reached Smolensk on November 9th, starving soldiers ransacked the depots before anyone could organize distribution. Ney's rearguard arrived 6 days later to find almost nothing left. Kutuzov, meanwhile, had moved ahead and prepared an ambush near Krasny. For 3 days, the French fought through deep snow to escape the trap. Napoleon used the Imperial Guard to punch a hole through the Russian positions. 2 regiments of Young Guard were ordered to sacrifice themselves to protect the column. They were annihilated. Kutuzov was criticized for not destroying the French outright, but even his troops were frostbitten, starving, and exhausted conscripts. Not every corps escaped. Ney, with 6,000 men, arrived at Krasny to find 60,000 Russians blocking the road. His men charged with desperate fury, but were cut down. Refusing to surrender, Ney led the survivors on a night crossing of the frozen Dnieper, then marched 45 miles through open country under constant Cossack attack. When he rejoined the army with only 800 fighting men, the French hailed him as a hero, but even miracles could not save the Grande Armée. 3 Russian armies were closing in. Napoleon desperately needed to reach Minsk, where huge stores of food and clothing awaited. Then came crushing news. Minsk had fallen. Chichagov held the bridges over the Berezina. The river, which should have been frozen solid, was now a churning mass of ice and water because of an unexpected thaw. The Grande Armée appeared doomed, but there was one chance: a ford discovered near the village of Studienka. Napoleon ordered diversions, feints, and desperate rearguard actions to mislead the Russians. General Ebel's Dutch engineers began building pontoon bridges in freezing water. Working day and night, many died in the river. But within 24 hours, the bridges stood. Borodino's corps crossed first, establishing a fragile bridgehead. Then the remnants of the army followed. Chichagov, deceived by false movements, arrived too late. When he finally attacked, Swiss regiments held the line with unmatched courage. On the east bank, Victor's rearguard fought desperately as Wittgenstein's men closed in. Blizzard winds howled across the river. Thousands of stragglers panicked, rushing the bridges, trampling one another, falling into the torrent. When the engineers burned the bridges to keep them from the enemy, thousands were left behind. The retreat continued toward Vilna. Temperatures dropped to -37. Men collapsed as they marched, some froze in place. Others simply lay down and never rose again. Cossacks prowled the flanks. Russian peasants hunted isolated soldiers. The army that had once been the terror of Europe now moved as a shadow of itself. On December 5th, Napoleon made a decision that stunned his troops. he left the army, disguising himself and racing across Europe to reach Paris. Many soldiers felt abandoned, but his marshals knew the truth. There had already been one attempted coup, and Napoleon believed only he could save France from collapse. 7 days later, the remnants of the Grande Armée, 20,000 survivors, out of more than 500,000, crossed back into friendly territory. Of every 12 men who marched into Russia, only 2 returned. Napoleon had misjudged Russia's geography, its armies, its people, its politics, its resolve. The disaster shattered his prestige. Across Europe, enemies sensed weakness. Coalitions formed. The final act of the Napoleonic Wars was about to begin. Years later, recalling the campaign, Napoleon told his ministers, "Fortune has dazzled me. I let it lead me astray. I stayed too long in Moscow. I made a grave mistake, but I will repair it." He tried. Europe was ready. His empire would never recover from Russia. 1812. The campaign that broke the legend. Russia, 1812. Napoleon crosses into his former allies' territory with the greatest army ever assembled in Europe. 600,000 men march east, believing they are part of a campaign that will end in triumph. But as the vast columns roll over the frontier and into an unforgiving land, the decisive victory Napoleon seeks stays just out of reach. Russia refuses to fight, refuses to break, refuses to surrender, and what begins as an invasion meant to secure Napoleon's dominance will soon become the most infamous retreat in military history. The road to disaster began years earlier, with an alliance that was never built to last. In 1807, after defeating Russia at Friedland, Napoleon traveled to Tilsit to meet the young Tsar Alexander. Their meeting was theatrical, symbolic to emperors on a raft in the middle of a river, shaping the future of Europe together. They spoke of friendship, partnership, and a united vision. For a brief moment it seemed genuine, but the seeds of conflict were already planted. Napoleon's creation of the Duchy of Warsaw infuriated Russia. To Alexander, the resurrection of a Polish state, even partially, was a direct threat to Russian security. Then came Napoleon's attempt to marry Alexander's sister, an offer the Romanovs resisted for more than a year, until Napoleon took the humiliation personally and married Austria's princess. Instead, soon after, he annexed Oldenburg, violating a promise made at Tilsit and offending Alexander's family. But the breaking point came with the continental system. Napoleon's blockade against Britain hurt Russia far more than it hurt the British. Russian merchants starved. Russia's economy collapsed, and in secret Russian ports reopened their trade with Britain. When Napoleon learned of this, he was enraged. 2 emperors who once shook hands now stood on opposite sides of a widening gulf, each accusing the other of treachery. Both began preparing for war they claimed to want to avoid. In 1811, Napoleon began assembling a force so large that the scale defied imagination. 600,000 soldiers, drawn from every corner of his empire. Fewer than half were French. Poles marched in hopes of regaining their homeland. Germans from Saxony, Bavaria, Westphalia, and Württemberg filled the ranks. Italians, Swiss, Dutch, Croats, Portuguese, and Spaniards marched beside them. Even Prussians and Austrians, defeated in earlier wars, were now reluctant allies compelled to join. It was a multinational colossus, but also a fragile one. Many were inexperienced. Many did not want to fight. Some would desert the moment hardship struck. Opposing this monster, the Russians fielded only 220,000 men under Barclay de Tolly, Prince Bagrushin, and Tormusov. Outnumbered and unsure of where Napoleon might strike, Russia made 2 strategic moves that would change everything. Sweden, once an enemy, had become a potential threat until a former French marshal who now ruled Sweden promised neutrality after Napoleon seized Swedish Pomerania without warning. Meanwhile, Russia made peace with the Ottoman Empire, ending 6 years of conflict in the south. Both flanks were now secure. Russian manpower could now turn north to face Napoleon's invasion. On June 24, 1812, Napoleon's Grande Armée crossed the Niemen River. The crossing took 5 full days. The invasion had begun. Napoleon planned to swing north of the Pripyat Marsh, destroy Barclay's army, then trap aggressions. in a decisive double blow. He expected victory in 5 weeks, but Barclay refused to fight. Facing Napoleon's massive force, he chose strategic retreat, burning grain, crops, and villages to deny the invaders food or shelter. Bagration, aggressive by nature, hated the idea, but had no choice. The Russians withdrew deeper into their homeland. Napoleon reached Vilnius in just 4 days, but the Russian armies were already gone. The French emperor's frustration grew. To the south, his brother Jerome failed to pin down Bagration, allowing the Russians to escape a trap. Napoleon, furious, removed his brother from command. The campaign began exposing cracks in Napoleon's design. He knew Russia was poor and barren, so he prepared massive supply depots. But wagons struggled on muddy roads that turned to rivers under summer storms. The army's pace slowed dramatically as men waited for food and ammunition to catch up. The rapid maneuvers that once defined Napoleon's campaigns evaporated, and his soldiers, many new recruits, began collapsing in the heat. Exhaustion, hunger, and disease thinned the ranks before a major battle had even been fought. Desertions increased, typhus spread. Horses died by the thousands each week, crippling the cavalry and transport. The very mobility Napoleon relied on was dissolving. After 16 days resting at Vitebsk, Napoleon resumed his advance. Barclay retreated again, hoping to unite with Devout blocked Bagration's path at Saltanovka, forcing him to divert toward Smolensk instead. At Vitebsk, Napoleon clashed with Barclay's rearguard, but again the Russians slipped away, burning everything they left behind. Meanwhile, in the south, Russian forces defeated the Saxon 7th Corps, forcing Napoleon to divert Austrian troops to the area. By late July, Napoleon had advanced 250 miles into Russia, far more than he intended. His army had already lost 20% of its strength to disease and exhaustion. 250,000 horses had dwindled rapidly. The losses were catastrophic, and yet the French cavalry now faced a new enemy. These riders operated by their own rules. They struck suddenly, disappearing into forests and ravines before the French could counter. They ambushed patrols, raided supply lines, spread terror among stragglers, and forced Napoleon to divert thousands of soldiers to protect his rear. French scouts were blinded. Napoleon increasingly had no reliable intelligence on Russian movements. At Polotsk and Gorodechna, battles on the flanks reassured Napoleon that his wings were safe. He decided to push for Barclay and Bagration, now united, were under pressure to stand and fight. Russian morale demanded it. The army's honor demanded it, but their initial attack at Inkovo collapsed after false reports of French movements. Napoleon, realizing the Russian offensive was weak, made one of his best maneuvers, the Smolensk maneuver. Using Murat's cavalry to hide his real intentions, he crossed the Dnieper at night and marched for Smolensk. A single Russian division fought a heroic delaying action at Krasny, buying enough time for Bagration to reinforce Smolensk, spoiling Napoleon's chance at a surprise attack. When the French finally assaulted the city, the fighting was ferocious. Buildings burned, streets ran with gunfire and smoke, and once again, fearing encirclement, Barclay ordered retreat. Smolensk, spiritual heart of Russia, was left in flames. Napoleon entered the ruins. The battle had cost 10,000 casualties on each side, but it had solved nothing. The Russians escaped yet again. Napoleon paused, weighing the future. His men were exhausted, supplies dwindled, and summer was ending. Some advisors urged him to winter in Smolensk, but Moscow, 230 miles away, was a prize he could not resist. He believed the Russians must defend it. He believed Alexander must sue for peace once it fell. He continued the advance. In St. Petersburg, Alexander faced his own crisis. He had experienced a religious awakening, framing the conflict as a holy struggle against an invading Antichrist. Morale hung in the balance. The people demanded resistance. The nobles demanded battle. So, Alexander summoned an older general revered by the rank and file. Mikhail Kutuzov understood strategy, but he understood the Russian spirit even better. If Moscow fell without a fight, the consequences would be disastrous. 70 miles west of the city, near Borodino, the Russians prepared their stand.